Eleanor Nichols clutched the letter in her trembling hands as the stagecoach rattled across the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory, 1876. She had left everything behind: her comfortable Boston life, her teaching position, her friends, all for a man whose face she'd never seen, whose voice she'd never heard. Her parents had packed her trunk, kissed her tearful goodbye, and sent her west with nothing but a marriage contract and a promise of a better life. The summer heat pressed against the stagecoach windows as Eleanor dabbed her forehead with a handkerchief. 22 years old, and traveling alone to marry a stranger, what madness had possessed her to agree to this arrangement? Yet as the daughter of a merchant whose business had recently failed, her options had grown limited. When her parents' old friend had written about his ranch foreman needing a bride, they had seized upon it as providence. "Nearly there, miss," the driver called back, his voice barely audible over the rumbling wheels. "Silver Creek's just beyond that ridge." Eleanor peered through the dust-coated window at the vast landscape. The endless expanse of prairie and distant mountains was so unlike the crowded streets of Boston. Everything was bigger here, wilder, more intimidating. She smoothed down her travel-worn blue dress, wishing she looked more presentable for her first meeting with Mr. James Thornton, her husband-to-be. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of a weathered building with Silver Creek Station painted in fading letters across its front. Eleanor gathered her reticule and stepped carefully down from the carriage, her legs stiff from the 3-day journey. "Miss Nichols," a gruff voice called. She turned to see an older man with a gray beard approaching. "Yes, I'm Eleanor Nichols. Walter Green. I own the mercantile here. James asked me to meet you." He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to another. "There's been a change of plans, miss." Eleanor's heart sank. "Has Mr. Thornton changed his mind about our arrangement?" Walter's eyes darted away. "No, miss, I'm afraid there's been an accident. James was thrown from his horse last week. He didn't survive." The world seemed to tilt beneath Eleanor's feet. She reached for the stagecoach to steady herself. "I see," she managed, though she didn't see at all. What was she to do now? Thousands of miles from home with no prospects and dwindling funds. "Your trunk, miss." The stagecoach driver had already unloaded her belongings. "The ranch owner, Mr. Peterson, said you're still welcome at the Double P," Walter explained. "He feels responsible, seeing as how you came all this way on account of his foreman." Before Eleanor could respond, the thunder of hoofbeats drew her attention. A horse and rider were approaching at a gallop, kicking up dust that caught the late afternoon sun like gold flakes in the air. The rider pulled his mount to a stop before them, and Eleanor found herself looking up at a tall man whose face was partially obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. He dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing broad shoulders and a frame hardened by physical labor. "This her?" He asked Walter, his voice deep and resonant. Walter nodded. "Miss Nichols, this is Kieran Lawson," the man said, removing his hat to reveal sun-bronzed features and eyes the color of a summer storm. "I worked with James at the Double P." Eleanor extended her gloved hand, attempting to maintain her composure despite the day's shocking turn. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Lawson, though I wish it were under different circumstances." Kieran took her hand briefly, his calloused palm rough against her glove. "James was a good man." "We all took it hard." He glanced at her trunk. "That all you brought?" "Yes," Eleanor replied, suddenly feeling the inadequacy of her possessions for frontier life. "I'll take it." Kieran hoisted her trunk effortlessly onto his shoulder. "Got a wagon waiting at the end of the street, Mr. Peterson sent me to bring you to the ranch." "That's very kind, but perhaps I should consider returning east," Eleanor said, the reality of her situation beginning to settle in. "With Mr. Thornton gone, you came all this way for nothing then," Kieran interrupted, his direct gaze meeting hers. "Wyoming Territory needs good women. Peterson's offering you a place until you decide what you want to do." Walter nodded encouragingly. "The Double P is a respectable outfit, miss. You'd be safe there while you figure things out." Eleanor hesitated, weighing her limited options. Return home in defeat to her struggling parents, attempt to find work in this small frontier town, or accept temporary shelter at the ranch that had employed her intended husband. Very well, she decided, squaring her shoulders. I'll accompany you to the Double P, Mr. Lawson. Kieran nodded, seemingly satisfied with her decision. Wagons this way. Eleanor followed him down the dusty main street, aware of curious glances from the townspeople. Silver Creek was smaller than she had imagined, a handful of wooden buildings, a church with a modest steeple, and horses hitched to posts outside what appeared to be a saloon. The wagon was simple but sturdy, with a team of 2 bay horses waiting patiently. Kieran secured her trunk in the back, then offered his hand to help her onto the wooden seat. It's about an hour's ride to the ranch, he explained, climbing up beside her. Roads rough in places. As they left town behind, Eleanor found herself studying her companion surreptitiously. Kieran Lawson was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps in his late 20s. His hands were sure on the reins, his profile strong against the backdrop of the setting sun. There was something reassuring about his quiet confidence. How long have you worked at the Double P? She asked, breaking the silence. 5 years now, he replied. Came west from Missouri after the war. You fought in the war between the states, Kieran nodded. Toward the end, I was young. The wagon hit a rut, jostling Eleanor against Kieran's solid frame. She quickly straightened, embarrassed by the momentary contact. Sorry about that, he said, though his eyes remained fixed on the trail ahead. Told you the road was rough. They fell into silence again as the wagon rolled through the vast landscape. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks that took Eleanor's breath away. It's beautiful, she murmured, almost to herself. Kieran glanced at her. Different from Boston, I expect. Very different, Eleanor agreed. Everything seems bigger here. More untamed. A hint of a smile touched his lips. That's what draws most folks west, the freedom of it. As darkness began to fall, lights appeared in the distance, the windows of the Double P ranch house glowing like beacons in the gathering night. Eleanor felt a flutter of nervousness. What awaited her there? What would become of her now that her intended husband was gone? The ranch house was larger than she had expected. A sprawling 2-story structure of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several smaller buildings clustered nearby, a bunkhouse, a barn, and what appeared to be a cookhouse. Lanterns illuminated the yard, and the sounds of men's voices and livestock created a tapestry of unfamiliar noises. Kieran brought the wagon to a stop before the main house. We're here, he announced, unnecessarily. Before he could help her down, the front door opened, and an older man with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard stepped onto the porch. Miss Nichols, he called, approaching the wagon. Welcome to the Double P, I'm Harrison Peterson. Eleanor accepted his assistance, climbing down from the wagon. Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Peterson, especially under these difficult circumstances. Least I could do, Peterson replied, his weathered face creasing with genuine concern. James was like a son to me. I feel responsible for your situation. The fault is not yours, Eleanor assured him. These things happen in life. Peterson nodded appreciatively at her composure. You must be exhausted from your journey. Mrs. Cooper has prepared a room for you and dinners waiting inside. Kieran had already retrieved her trunk from the wagon. I'll take this up, he said, heading toward the house. Thank you, Mr. Lawson, Eleanor called after him, but he merely nodded without turning. Peterson led her into a comfortable parlor furnished with solid, practical pieces that spoke of frontier craftsmanship rather than Eastern refinement. A plump woman in her 50s hurried forward to greet them. This is Mrs. Cooper, our housekeeper, Peterson explained. She'll show you to your room and help you get settled. Come along, dear, Mrs. Cooper said warmly. You look dead on your feet. A hot meal and a soft bed will do wonders. Eleanor followed the housekeeper up a sturdy staircase to a pleasant room at the back of the house. Her trunk was already there, placed at the foot of a 4-poster bed covered with a colorful quilt. It's lovely, Eleanor said, genuinely touched by the care that had been taken for her comfort. Bathrooms down the hall, Mrs. Cooper explained. I've drawn water if you'd like to wash up before dinner. Just come down when you're ready. Left alone, Eleanor sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day finally overwhelming her. She had traveled to the edge of civilization to marry a man she had never met, only to discover he was dead. Now she was a guest in a strange house, surrounded by people she didn't know, with no clear path forward. Yet beneath her anxiety, she felt an unexpected flicker of something else, a sense of possibility. For the first time in her life, no one was directing her path. Her future, uncertain as it was, belonged to her alone. After washing and changing into a fresh dress, Eleanor made her way downstairs. In the dining room, she found Mr. Peterson, Mrs. Cooper, and to her surprise, Kieran Lawson seated at a large oak table. "Ah, Miss Nichols," Peterson said, rising. "Please join us. Kieran usually takes his meals in the bunkhouse with the other men, but I thought tonight he might join us since he brought you in." Kieran stood as Eleanor approached, pulling out the chair beside him. The gesture of gentlemanly courtesy seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "Thank you," she murmured, taking her seat. The meal was simple but hearty: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Eleanor found herself hungrier than she had realized, the stagecoach fare of the past few days having been barely palatable. "Tomorrow I'll show you around the ranch," Peterson said as they ate. "The Double P isn't just a cattle operation. We've got horses too, some of the finest in the territory." "I'd like that," Eleanor replied politely, though uncertainty about her future made it difficult to focus on ranch operations. Miss Nichols was a teacher in Boston, Peterson told Kieran. James mentioned it in his letters. Kieran glanced at her with new interest. "We could use a teacher hereabouts. Nearest school's in Silver Creek, and half the ranch children don't make it there regular, especially in winter." Eleanor brightened at the familiar topic. "I taught at a girls' academy for 3 years. I quite enjoyed it." "Might be something to consider," Peterson suggested. "Several families work the ranch and there are others nearby. We've got an old cabin that could be fixed up as a schoolhouse." The conversation continued, with Peterson outlining life at the Double P and Mrs. Cooper occasionally interjecting with domestic details. Kieran said little, but Eleanor was aware of his attentive presence beside her, his occasional glances when he thought she wouldn't notice. After dinner, Peterson excused himself to attend to some ranch business, and Mrs. Cooper began clearing the table. Eleanor rose to help her, but the housekeeper shooed her away. "You've had a long journey, dear. Why don't you get some rest?" Mrs. Cooper suggested. Kieran stood, his tall frame imposing in the lamplight. "I'll walk you up, Miss Nichols." Eleanor nodded, suddenly aware of how tired she truly was. They climbed the stairs in silence, pausing outside her door. "Thank you for your kindness today, Mr. Lawson," she said quietly. He studied her face for a moment. "Kieran," he corrected. "Out here, formality doesn't last long." "Kieran," she repeated, testing the name. "Then you must call me Eleanor," he nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Get some rest, Eleanor. Tomorrow's a new day." As he turned to leave, Eleanor called after him, "Were you and Mr. Thornton close friends?" Kieran paused, looking back at her. "Close enough that I promised him I'd look after you if anything happened to him. Good night, Eleanor." He disappeared down the hallway, leaving her standing at her door with more questions than answers, and the strange feeling that her life had irrevocably changed course in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. Eleanor woke to the unfamiliar sounds of a ranch coming to life: roosters crowing, cattle lowing in the distance, the clatter of activity from the cookhouse. Sunlight streamed through her window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. For a moment, she lay still, orienting herself to her new reality. After dressing in one of her simpler dresses, a pale blue cotton that wouldn't show dust too badly, she made her way downstairs. Mrs. Cooper was in the kitchen, kneading dough with strong, capable hands. "Good morning, dear." "Sleep well?" the housekeeper asked cheerfully. "Surprisingly well, thank you," Eleanor replied. "May I help with anything?" Mrs. Cooper looked pleased at the offer. "You can pour yourself some coffee, Mr. Peterson's already out with the men, but he said to tell you he'll be back mid-morning to show you around." Eleanor helped herself to coffee and a piece of fresh bread, then wandered onto the porch. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scents of pine and sage. From this vantage point, she could see much of the ranch, the barn and corrals, the bunkhouse where the ranch hands lived, and beyond them, pastures stretching toward distant mountains. Men moved purposefully around the yard, leading horses, carrying equipment, calling to each other in the casual camaraderie of those who work together daily. She spotted Kieran near the corral, his hat pulled low as he examined a horse's leg. Even from a distance, she could see the respect the other men showed him. After finishing her coffee, Eleanor returned inside to help Mrs. Cooper. The housekeeper seemed grateful for the assistance and kept up a steady stream of chatter as they worked, providing Eleanor with a wealth of information about the ranch and its inhabitants. Mr. Peterson lost his wife 10 years back, Mrs. Cooper explained as they washed breakfast dishes. No children of his own, which is why he treated James almost like a son. That's why he feels responsible for you, dear. And Mr. Lawson, what's his story? Eleanor asked, trying to sound merely conversational. Mrs. Cooper's eyes twinkled knowingly. Kieran's a good man, keeps to himself mostly. Came here 5 years ago, not much more than a boy despite having fought in the war. Mr. Peterson recognized his way with horses right off. Now he's the head wrangler in charge of all the ranch's horses. Before Eleanor could inquire further, the back door opened, and Peterson himself entered. There you are, Miss Nichols. Ready for that tour I promised. Eleanor spent the morning accompanying Peterson around the ranch, meeting workers and their families, seeing the operations that made the Double P one of the most successful ranches in the territory. She met the cook, a good-natured Mexican man named Miguel who ruled the cookhouse with benevolent authority. She visited the blacksmith shop, where a burly man named Frank was shoeing a horse, the ringing of his hammer echoing across the yard. And here's where we break the young horses, Peterson explained as they approached a circular corral where several men were gathered. Watching a scene unfolding inside the corral, Kieran was mounted on a bucking horse, one hand gripping a rope, the other raised for balance. The horse twisted and jumped, determined to unseat its rider. Eleanor gasped as the animal gave a particularly violent buck, but Kieran moved with it, his body relaxed yet alert, in perfect harmony with the horse's movements. Best horseman I've ever seen, Peterson said proudly. He can gentle the wildest Mustang. After what seemed like an eternity but was probably only minutes, the horse began to tire, its bucks becoming less forceful. Gradually, it slowed to a trot, then a walk, snorting but no longer fighting. Kieran leaned forward, patting its neck, speaking words Eleanor couldn't hear but could see were having a calming effect. He guided the horse to the corral fence where they stood. Morning, he said, tipping his hat to Eleanor. His face was flushed from exertion, a sheen of sweat on his brow, but his eyes were alive with the satisfaction of a job well done. That was remarkable, Eleanor said honestly. I've never seen anything like it. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, just patience and understanding. Horses are like people, they respond better to kindness than force, Peterson chuckled. Don't let him fool you, Miss Nichols. What Kieran does takes skill few men possess. He checked his pocket watch. I need to meet with the cattle foreman. Kieran, would you mind showing Miss Nichols the schoolhouse site we discussed? Not at all, Kieran replied, dismounting in one fluid motion. He handed the reins to another cowboy with instructions for cooling down the horse, then turned to Eleanor. It's a short walk, do you mind? Not at all, she echoed, falling into step beside him. They walked past the main buildings to a small clearing where a cabin stood, somewhat neglected but solidly built. Wild roses grew around its foundation, and a massive oak provided shade for one side. It was the original homestead cabin, Kieran explained, pushing open the door. Been used for storage these past few years. Inside was a single room, dusty and cluttered with crates and old furniture, but Eleanor immediately saw its potential. Large windows would provide ample light, and the stone fireplace would keep it warm in winter. It would need a good cleaning and some repairs, she mused, walking around the space. And desks for the children, of course, but it could work very well as a schoolhouse. Kieran watched her, leaning against the doorframe. So you're considering staying then? Eleanor turned to face him, realizing she had indeed been thinking of staying, at least temporarily. I suppose I am. I have limited funds for a return journey and no pressing reason to go back. Teaching here would give me purpose while I decide on my future. The children would benefit, Kieran said. Most ranch hands' kids get spotty schooling at best. Did you attend school regularly as a child? Eleanor asked, curious about his background. Until I was 12, he replied. Then my father died and I had to work. My mother taught me what she could at night. She'd been a teacher before she married. This glimpse into his past intrigued Eleanor. She must have been a remarkable woman. She was, he agreed, his expression softening momentarily. Then, as if catching himself revealing too much, he straightened from the doorway. We should head back. Miguel gets cross if folks are late for the noon meal. As they walked back to the main house, Eleanor found herself stealing glances at the man beside her. There was a complexity to Kieran Lawson that belied his taciturn manner, a gentleness beneath the rugged exterior that showed in his handling of horses and in rare, unguarded moments. Mr. Peterson mentioned you made a promise to James, she said carefully, that you would look after me. Kieran's stride faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. James was concerned about sending for a bride from so far away. Asked me to make sure you were taken care of if anything happened to him. That was thoughtful of him, Eleanor said, touched by the consideration of a man she would never meet. He was looking forward to meeting you, Kieran added quietly. Read your letters to me sometimes. Said you had a way with words that made him feel like he already knew you. Eleanor felt a pang of regret for the relationship that never had a chance to blossom. I wish I could have known him. He was a good man, Kieran said simply. Deserved better than he got. They had reached the house, and Kieran excused himself to wash up before the meal. Eleanor stood for a moment on the porch, watching him stride toward the bunkhouse, his tall figure silhouetted against the midday sun. That evening, after a day spent exploring the ranch and helping Mrs. Cooper, Eleanor sat on the porch, enjoying the cooler air. The sunset painted the western sky in spectacular hues of orange and purple, and the first stars were beginning to appear overhead. The sound of boot steps on the wooden boards alerted her to Kieran's approach. He carried 2 cups of coffee and offered one to her without speaking. Thank you, she said, accepting the steaming cup. It's beautiful here at this time of day. Kieran settled into the chair beside hers, stretching his long legs out before him. One of the reasons I stay, he admitted. Never tire of these sunsets. They sat in companionable silence, watching the light fade from the sky. Eleanor found it remarkable how comfortable she felt in his presence, despite having known him for only a day. I've been thinking about the schoolhouse, she said finally. If I were to stay and teach, how many children might attend? 12 or 15 from the ranch families, Kieran estimated, maybe more from neighboring homesteads if word spreads. That's a good number, Eleanor mused. Not too many for one teacher to manage. You're really considering it then, she nodded. I need to support myself somehow, and teaching is what I know. Mr. Peterson has generously offered room and board plus a small salary. You'd be doing these children a great service, Kieran said. Most of their parents can barely read themselves. What about you? Eleanor asked impulsively. Would you visit the school sometimes, perhaps read to the children? Kieran looked surprised by the invitation. Me, I'm no school teacher. But you value education, she pointed out. I can tell from the way you speak of it. The children would benefit from hearing a man they respect read and discuss books. He seemed to consider this, taking a sip of his coffee. Maybe, if time allows. A comfortable silence fell between them again. In the distance, a coyote called, its lonesome howl echoing across the valley. Does it ever get lonely out here? Eleanor asked softly. Kieran's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. Sometimes, he admitted, but there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. I've known more loneliness in a crowded city than out here under these stars. His words resonated with Eleanor, who had often felt isolated despite Boston's bustling society. I understand that, she said quietly. He turned to look at her then, his eyes reflecting the last light of day. I think you might, he said, his voice low. James said you had depths to you. I can see that now. The simple observation touched Eleanor more deeply than elaborate compliments ever had. Thank you, she whispered. For a brief moment, something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Then Kieran cleared his throat and stood, breaking the spell. Getting late, he said. I've got an early start tomorrow. Good night, Eleanor. Good night, Kieran, she replied, watching him disappear into the gathering darkness, his words and the warmth in his eyes lingering in her mind long after he was gone. The next week passed in a blur of activity as Eleanor settled into life at the Double P. She spent her mornings helping Mrs. Cooper with household tasks and her afternoons preparing the schoolhouse. Several ranch hands under Kieran's direction had cleared out the old furniture, repaired the windows and roof, and built simple desks and benches. Eleanor swept and scrubbed until the cabin shone, arranged the new furniture, and hung a small blackboard on the wall. Word spread quickly about the new schoolteacher, and parents began appearing at the main house to introduce themselves and their children. Eleanor kept a careful list of prospective students, planning lessons appropriate for various ages and abilities. She saw Kieran daily, though their interactions were brief, a greeting as he rode past the schoolhouse, a few words exchanged at dinner when he occasionally joined them at the main house. Yet each encounter left her more intrigued by the quiet cowboy with the gentle hands and thoughtful eyes. On Sunday, a week after her arrival, Peterson announced they would attend church in Silver Creek. "Good way for you to meet more folks," he explained as they rode toward town in the wagon, Mrs. Cooper beside them in her Sunday best. The small white church was filled to capacity when they arrived, with families from town and surrounding ranches gathered for the weekly service. Eleanor felt conspicuous as she followed Peterson and Mrs. Cooper to a pew, aware of curious glances and whispered comments. "That's her, the Eastern woman who came to marry James Thornton. Poor thing, traveled all that way only to find him dead. Wonder what she'll do now." The whispers faded as the service began, but Eleanor remained uncomfortably aware of being an object of interest. At the conclusion of the sermon, Peterson led her around the churchyard, introducing her to what seemed like half the territory. "This is Miss Eleanor Nichols," he would say. "She's opening a school at the Double P for ranch children." Most people received the news with enthusiasm, several more parents expressing interest in sending their children. Eleanor smiled and nodded, trying to remember names and faces, feeling overwhelmed by the sudden social immersion after a week of relative seclusion. "You're doing fine," a low voice said near her ear. She turned to find Kieran standing close behind her, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday clothes but somehow more handsome than ever. "I didn't see you during the service," she said, relieved to see a familiar face. "Came in late," he admitted. "Had to check on a mare about to foal." Before Eleanor could respond, a striking blonde woman approached, her expensive dress and elaborate hat marking her as someone of means. "Kieran Lawson," she drawled, placing a gloved hand on his arm. "I haven't seen you in town for ages." "Miss Harrington," Kieran acknowledged stiffly, subtly shifting away from her touch. "This is Miss Eleanor Nichols. Eleanor, this is Victoria Harrington. Her father owns the bank in Silver Creek." Victoria's assessment of Eleanor was swift and dismissive. "Ah yes, James Thornton's mail-order bride. How adventurous of you to travel so far to marry a man you'd never met. And now you're staying on at the Double P despite his unfortunate accident. How resilient." The implication in her tone was clear, and Eleanor felt her cheeks flush with indignation. Before she could formulate a proper response, Kieran spoke. "Miss Nichols is establishing a school for the ranch children," he said, his voice cool. "Something this community has needed for years." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "How noble. Well, I'm sure you'll both excuse me. Father is waiting." She nodded curtly and moved away, her skirt swishing dramatically. "I apologize for Miss Harrington," Kieran said quietly. "She can be territorial," Eleanor suggested, having recognized the woman's behavior for what it was. A rare smile crossed Kieran's face. "That's one word for it. She's quite beautiful," Eleanor observed neutrally, though she felt an unexpected twinge of something that might have been jealousy. "Beauty isn't just about appearance," Kieran replied, his gaze meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Before either could say more, Peterson called them over to meet the town doctor and his wife. The rest of the afternoon passed in a whirlwind of introductions and conversations. By the time they headed back to the ranch, Eleanor's head was spinning with new names and faces. "You made quite an impression," Peterson told her as they rode. "Half the families in the county will be sending their children to your school. I hope I can live up to their expectations," Eleanor said, suddenly doubting her ability to teach children of such varied backgrounds and needs. "You'll do fine," Mrs. Cooper assured her, patting her hand. "Those children need someone who cares, and that's clearly you." That night, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, Eleanor slipped downstairs and out onto the porch. The moon was nearly full, bathing the ranch in silver light. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, breathing in the cool night air. The sound of a horse approaching drew her attention. Kieran rode into the yard, dismounting gracefully and leading his horse toward the barn. He must have noticed movement on the porch, for he changed direction and walked toward her. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, removing his hat as he climbed the steps. "Too much to think about," she admitted. "The school opens tomorrow. Nervous." He leaned against the porch railing, his face half shadowed in the moonlight. "A little," she confessed. "I've never taught children from such diverse backgrounds. In Boston, my students were all from similar families with similar expectations." "Children are children," Kieran said simply. "They respond to fairness and kindness, same as anyone, like horses," she suggested with a small smile. "Similar principles," he agreed, returning her smile, "though I wouldn't recommend sugar cubes as rewards." Eleanor laughed softly, appreciating his attempt to ease her anxiety. "Where were you tonight? I noticed you didn't return with the other men after church." "Checking fence lines in the north pasture," he replied. "We've had reports of rustlers in the area." "Is that dangerous?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Kieran shrugged. "Can be. Cattle thieves don't take kindly to interference." "Please be careful," Eleanor said impulsively, then felt self-conscious at revealing her concern. Kieran studied her face for a long moment. "I always am," he said quietly. Then, changing the subject, "What time does school start tomorrow?" 9 o'clock, she replied, "though I expect I'll be there much earlier to prepare." "I'll ride by mid-morning," he promised. "See how you're getting on." "I'd like that," Eleanor said, oddly comforted by the thought of his visit. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the soft nickering of Kieran's horse and the distant call of a night bird. Eleanor found herself acutely aware of his presence, the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him, the way the moonlight caught in his dark hair, the steady rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. "I should let you get some rest," Kieran said finally, straightening from the railing. "Big day tomorrow." "Yes," Eleanor agreed, though she was reluctant to end their conversation. "Good night, Kieran." "Good night, Eleanor," he replied, replacing his hat. "You'll do fine tomorrow. Those children are lucky to have you." As she watched him lead his horse toward the barn, Eleanor realized that in just a week, this man and this place had begun to feel more like home than Boston ever had. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. The first day of school dawned clear and cool, with a hint of autumn in the air. Eleanor arrived at the schoolhouse an hour early, arranging books and slates, writing a welcome message on the blackboard, and placing a vase of wildflowers on her desk, a small touch of beauty for the children's first day. They began arriving shortly before 9, some on horseback, some walking from nearby ranch houses, all dressed in their cleanest clothes and wearing expressions ranging from excitement to trepidation. Eleanor greeted each child by name, having memorized her list of students, and directed them to seats appropriate for their ages. By 9 o'clock, 14 children between the ages of 6 and 16 were seated before her, watching expectantly. Eleanor took a deep breath and smiled. "Good morning, children. I'm Miss Nichols, and I'm very pleased to meet all of you. Today marks the beginning of our school, and I hope it will be a place where you'll not only learn to read and cipher, but also discover the joy of knowledge." The morning progressed smoothly as Eleanor assessed the children's abilities and organized them into groups. The older ones helped the younger, and all showed an eagerness to learn that warmed her heart. By mid-morning, when they took a break to play outside, Eleanor felt a growing confidence in her decision to stay and teach. She was watching the children play a game of tag when the sound of hoofbeats announced a visitor. Kieran rode into the clearing, his tall figure familiar and somehow reassuring. The children called greetings to him clearly. He was well known and liked among the ranch families. "Mr. Lawson," little Emma Sullivan called. "Have you come to school too?" Kieran dismounted, smiling at the 7-year-old. "Just visiting today, Emma. Wanted to see how Miss Nichols is managing with all of you rascals." Eleanor approached, pleased by his arrival despite telling herself it was merely a friendly visit. "We're doing very well, aren't we, children?" A chorus of agreement rose from the students, several eager to tell Kieran what they had already learned that morning. He listened patiently, his attention genuine, asking questions that showed real interest in their progress. "They seem taken with you," he observed when the children returned to their game. "They're wonderful," Eleanor said sincerely, "so eager to learn. Some of the older ones read quite well already. Most of these parents value education even if they had little themselves," Kieran explained. "They want better for their children. A universal desire, I think," Eleanor agreed. Kieran's gaze lingered on her face. "You look happy." The simple observation caught her off guard. "I am," she realized aloud. "Happier than I expected to be, given the circumstances that brought me here." "Sometimes life takes unexpected turns," Kieran said quietly. "Doesn't mean they're wrong turns." Before Eleanor could respond to this philosophical remark, a commotion among the children drew their attention. Two boys were arguing, their voices rising as they shoved each other. "Thomas started it," 9-year-old William Cooper protested as Eleanor approached. "Did not," Thomas Jensen retorted. "He said my pa can't read." "Gentlemen," Eleanor said firmly, "this is not how we resolve disagreements. We use words, not hands." The boys looked down abashed. Eleanor noticed Kieran watching with approval as she guided the children through a discussion of their conflict and appropriate ways to express disagreement. "Sorry, Miss Nichols," they mumbled in unison when she was finished. "Thank you for apologizing," she said. "Now shake hands with each other and remember, in this school, we treat everyone with respect." As the boys shook hands and ran off to rejoin the game, Kieran stepped closer. "Well handled," he said quietly. "You're a natural teacher." His praise warmed her more than it should have. "Thank you." "I believe children respond to clear expectations and fair treatment." "Like horses?" he asked, echoing her words from the previous night, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Eleanor laughed. "Similar principles," she conceded. The school bell rang, signaling the end of break time. Kieran tipped his hat. "I should let you get back to it. Glad to see things going well." "Will you visit again?" Eleanor asked, trying to keep her tone casual. "Count on it," he replied, mounting his horse. As he rode away, several children waved, and Eleanor found herself watching his retreating figure until he disappeared among the trees. The rest of the school day passed quickly, and by the time the children dispersed for home, Eleanor felt a deep satisfaction with her new role. She remained in the schoolhouse after the last child left, organizing materials for the next day and recording her observations of each student's abilities. The sound of the door opening made her look up, expecting perhaps a forgotten lunch pail or a parent with a question. Instead, she found Victoria Harrington standing in the doorway, elegant even in a riding habit, her golden hair perfectly arranged beneath a small hat. "Miss Nichols," Victoria said coolly, "I thought I might find you here." Eleanor rose from her desk, surprised and wary. "Miss Harrington." "This is unexpected." Victoria stepped inside, her gaze sweeping critically over the simple schoolroom. "Quaint," she remarked, "though I suppose it serves its purpose." "The children seem comfortable here," Eleanor replied evenly. "Was there something specific you wanted to discuss?" Victoria moved to the front of the room, trailing gloved fingers along a student's desk. "I thought we should have a private conversation, woman to woman." Eleanor maintained her composure, though something in Victoria's tone set her on edge. "I'm listening." "You've made quite an impression in a short time," Victoria said, her voice deceptively casual. "Especially on Kieran Lawson. Mr. Lawson has been kind enough to help with the schoolhouse preparations," Eleanor replied carefully, "as have many people at the Double P." Victoria laughed, a brittle sound without humor. "Let's not pretend, Miss Nichols. I saw the way he looked at you yesterday, and the way you looked at him." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks but kept her voice steady. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Miss Harrington, but Mr. Lawson and I are merely acquaintances. Kieran and I have an understanding," Victoria stated, her blue eyes hard despite her smile. "He may not acknowledge it publicly yet, but my father and I have plans that involve the Double P. Kieran is an important part of those plans." "I fail to see how this concerns me," Eleanor said, Though her heart had begun to beat faster, Victoria stepped closer. You came here to marry one man and lost that opportunity through unfortunate circumstances. It would be inappropriate for you to set your sights on another so quickly. People might question your motives. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air between them. Eleanor straightened her spine, drawing on inner reserves of strength. My only sights are set on providing these children with an education, Miss Harrington. As for Mr. Lawson, he seems perfectly capable of making his own decisions about his future. Victoria's smile tightened. You're new here, Miss Nichols. You don't understand how things work in this territory. My father's bank holds notes on half the ranches in the county. His influence extends beyond Silver Creek. It would be a shame if your little school encountered difficulties. Eleanor felt a flash of anger. Are you threatening me, Miss Harrington? Merely offering friendly advice, Victoria replied smoothly, moving toward the door. Think carefully about your position here. You're an outsider with no connections, no family, no prospects beyond the charity of Harrison Peterson. It would be unfortunate if you jeopardized even that through imprudent attachments. Before Eleanor could respond, Victoria departed, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume and the unmistakable chill of a warning. Eleanor sank back into her chair, her hands trembling slightly as she processed the encounter. Was Victoria right? Was she developing feelings for Kieran that might compromise her position here? And did Victoria truly have an understanding with him, despite his obvious discomfort in her presence yesterday? Eleanor gathered her things slowly, troubled by the confrontation. As she locked the schoolhouse door, she resolved to be more circumspect in her interactions with Kieran. Her position was indeed precarious, and she couldn't afford to become the subject of gossip, or worse, to develop feelings for a man who might be promised to another. The walk back to the main house gave her time to compose herself. By the time she reached the porch, she had determined to focus solely on her teaching duties and to maintain a polite but distant relationship with Kieran Lawson, regardless of the inexplicable pull she felt toward him. Her resolution lasted precisely 3 days until the afternoon. Kieran appeared at the schoolhouse door just as the children were leaving, his expression grave. Eleanor, he said, the urgency in his voice immediately putting her on alert. There's trouble. Rustlers hit the north pasture last night. 2 hands were shot, my God, she gasped. They'll live, he assured her. But Peterson's organizing a posse to track the Rustlers. I'm riding with them. Eleanor's heart constricted with fear. When? Within the hour, he replied. We'll be gone a few days at least. She nodded, trying to hide her concern. Please be careful. Kieran hesitated, then stepped closer, his voice lowering. I wanted to tell you myself, not have you hear it from someone else. The simple consideration touched her deeply. Thank you, she whispered. He looked as if he wanted to say more, his gray eyes searching her face. Then, with a nod, he turned to go. Kieran, she called after him. When he turned back, she found herself at a loss for words. Come back safely, she finally managed. Something in his expression softened. I will, he promised. And then he was gone, leaving Eleanor with the realization that her attempt at emotional distance had failed completely. That evening, from her bedroom window, she watched the posse ride out 12 men, including Peterson and Kieran, armed and provisioned for several days' pursuit. The gravity of their mission was evident in their expressions and the absence of the usual banter that accompanied ranch activities. As the riders disappeared from view, Eleanor pressed her hand against the cool glass of the window, a wordless prayer for their safety, especially for one tall cowboy whose presence in her life had become far more significant than she had been willing to admit, even to herself. The next few days were the longest of Eleanor's life. She taught her classes, helped Mrs. Cooper with household tasks, and tried to maintain a calm demeanor despite the knot of anxiety that had taken up permanent residence in her stomach. On the 4th day after the posse's departure, Eleanor was reading to her youngest students when a commotion outside drew her attention. Through the window, she saw riders approaching the returning posse, dust-covered and weary. Children, she said, striving to keep her voice steady, please continue reading silently while I step outside for a moment. Eleanor counted the returning men anxiously. 11. Where was the 12th? Her heart hammered against her ribs as she scanned the group again. Then she saw him, Kieran, riding at the rear, supporting another man who appeared to be wounded. Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her knees weak. She returned to the classroom, somehow finishing the day's lessons despite her distraction. When the children had gone, she hurried to the main house, where Mrs. Cooper was already preparing bandages and hot water. 3 wounded, none fatally, the housekeeper reported briskly. They caught the Rustlers near the territorial border, turned them over to the marshal's men. And Mr. Peterson? Eleanor asked, fine, though exhausted, already in his room resting. And Kieran? The question came out more tentatively than she'd intended. Mrs. Cooper's knowing glance made Eleanor blush. He's in the barn, seeing to the horses. Man always puts those animals before himself. Eleanor hesitated, then made a decision. She filled a basin with warm water, gathered clean cloths and bandages, and headed for the barn. If Kieran wouldn't come for treatment, she would bring it to him. The barn was dim and warm, filled with the comforting smells of hay and horses. Eleanor found Kieran in the last stall, brushing down his mount with slow, methodical strokes despite the obvious exhaustion in his posture. You should be resting, she said softly. He turned, surprise registering briefly before his features composed themselves. Need to take care of Thunder first. He carried me hard for days. Eleanor set down her supplies on a nearby barrel. Then let me take care of you while you finish. Kieran looked as if he might protest, then seemed to think better of it. Not much to take care of, just tired. Eleanor stepped closer, noticing for the first time the dried blood on his sleeve. You're hurt, Scratch, he dismissed, continuing to brush the horse. Bullet grazed me. Let me see, she insisted, her teacher's voice brooking no argument. With a sigh, Kieran set down the brush and shrugged out of his jacket, wincing slightly at the movement. The left sleeve of his shirt was torn and crusted with blood. Sit, Eleanor commanded, pointing to a hay bale. To her surprise, he complied without argument, sinking onto the makeshift seat with a barely suppressed groan. She rolled up his sleeve carefully, revealing an angry furrow along his upper arm where a bullet had indeed grazed him. This needs cleaning, she said, dipping a cloth in the warm water. It might sting. I've had worse, he replied, though he tensed as she began to gently clean the wound. They were silent as she worked, the only sounds the occasional soft nickering of the horses and Kieran's measured breathing. Eleanor was acutely aware of his proximity, of the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers, of the lean muscle of his arm. You were worried, he said suddenly, his voice low. Eleanor's hand stilled momentarily. Yes, she admitted, not looking up. Everyone was, not what I meant. She met his gaze then, unable to deny the truth he clearly saw. Yes, I was worried. For you. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. I thought about you, he confessed quietly, out there, kept thinking I had to make it back. Eleanor's heart raced at his words. I'm glad you did, she whispered. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, something unspoken but powerful passing between them. Then Kieran's good hand came up to catch hers where it rested on his arm. Eleanor, he began, his voice rough with emotion. The barn door opened, spilling late afternoon sunlight into the dim interior. They moved apart instinctively as Peterson's voice called out, Kieran, you in here. Last stall, Kieran replied, his voice steady despite the intensity of the moment before. Peterson appeared, looking tired but satisfied. Thought I'd find you with the horses, he said, then noticed Eleanor and the medical supplies. Good thinking, Miss Nichols. This stubborn fool would bleed to death before asking for help. Just a graze, Kieran insisted, rolling down his sleeve over the bandage Eleanor had applied. Well, get yourself cleaned up and rested, Peterson instructed. We've got that horse buyer coming from Denver tomorrow, remember? Need you to show him the yearlings. After Peterson left, an awkward silence fell between Eleanor and Kieran. The interrupted moment hung in the air between them, both uncertain how to reclaim it or whether they should. Thank you, Kieran finally said, gesturing to his bandaged arm. For this. Of course, Eleanor replied, gathering her supplies. You should get some rest, as Mr. Peterson said. Kieran stood, towering over her in the confined space of the stall. Eleanor, about what I was saying, it's all right, she interrupted, suddenly afraid of what he might say or what she might feel. Victoria's warning echoed in her mind. You're tired and it's been a difficult few days. We can talk another time. Before he could respond, she turned and left the barn, her heart pounding with emotions she wasn't ready to name or acknowledge. That night, sleep eluded her as she replayed the moment in the barn over and over. The look in Kieran's eyes, the feel of his hand on hers, the words he'd begun to say before they were interrupted. What would have happened if Peterson hadn't arrived when he did? And what of Victoria's claim of an understanding with Kieran? Eleanor had seen no evidence of affection on his part, but Victoria's confidence suggested there might be more to the situation than was apparent. The last thing Eleanor wanted was to become entangled in a complicated relationship that might jeopardize her position at the Double P. She rose early the next morning, determined to focus on her teaching duties and to maintain a professional distance from Kieran until she better understood the situation. But as she passed the kitchen on her way out, Mrs. Cooper called her in. "No school today, dear," the housekeeper informed her. "Mr. Peterson just got word there's scarlet fever in Silver Creek. Doctor wants all gatherings postponed until they determine how widespread it is." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. "My God, the children, no reports among our families yet," Mrs. Cooper reassured her, "but best to be cautious." Mr. Peterson's writing to all the outlying homes to spread the word. With her day suddenly empty, Eleanor found herself at loose ends. After helping Mrs. Cooper with some baking, she decided to use the unexpected free time to organize her teaching materials and plan future lessons. The schoolhouse was quiet and still as she entered, sunlight streaming through the windows to create pools of light on the wooden floor. Eleanor had just settled at her desk when the door opened, and Kieran stood framed in the entrance, his tall figure silhouetted against the bright day outside. "Heard about the fever warning," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "Thought I'd find you here." Eleanor's heart quickened at the sight of him, freshly shaved and dressed in clean clothes, his injured arm held slightly stiffly at his side. "Shouldn't you be showing horses to the buyer from Denver?" he sent a telegram, delayed by a washout on the railroad line. Kieran moved closer, stopping a few feet from her desk. "We need to talk, Eleanor." The directness of his statement left no room for evasion. "Yes," she agreed quietly, rising from her chair. "I suppose we do." Kieran took a deep breath as if steeling himself. "Yesterday in the barn, before Peterson interrupted, I was about to say something important." "I remember," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. "These past weeks since you arrived." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "You've changed things for me." Eleanor's pulse raced, but caution made her hesitate. "Kieran, before you continue, there's something I should mention. Miss Harrington visited me here a few days ago." His expression darkened. "Victoria, what did she want?" She implied that you and she have an understanding, that her father has plans involving you and the Double P. Eleanor watched his face carefully as she spoke. To her surprise, Kieran laughed a short, humorless sound. "Victoria Harrington has been planning my future for years, without any input from me. Her father wants to expand his holdings. Marrying his daughter to Peterson's head wrangler would give him influence over the Double P, and you've never encouraged these plans." Eleanor asked, needing to be certain. "Never," Kieran stated firmly. "Victoria sees me as a means to an end, nothing more. There's never been anything between us beyond her ambition and her father's scheming." Relief washed over Eleanor, though she tried not to show it too plainly. She also suggested that it would be inappropriate for me to develop attachment so soon after coming here to marry another man. Kieran's expression softened. "And what do you think about that?" Eleanor hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I think that I came here with certain expectations that were dramatically altered by circumstances beyond my control. I think that life rarely follows the paths we plan, and I think—" She paused, gathering her courage, that some connections cannot be denied, no matter how unexpected or inconvenient they might be. Kieran crossed the remaining distance between them, stopping just a foot away. "That day you arrived on the stagecoach," he said quietly, "I volunteered to fetch you from town. Not because Peterson asked me to, but because I'd read your letters to James. I was curious about the woman who wrote with such intelligence and warmth. You read my letters? Eleanor asked, surprised. James would read parts aloud sometimes, said your words made him feel like he already knew you. Kieran's gaze held her steadily. When I saw you step down from that coach, something happened to me, something I can't explain, and when I had to tell you about James, the look on your face. I wanted to protect you from that moment on. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. Is that why you brought me to the Double P, out of a sense of obligation to James? At first, maybe, Kieran admitted, but it became something else very quickly. These weeks, watching you with the children, seeing your strength and determination. Eleanor, I've never met anyone like you. He took her hand gently in his calloused palm warm against her skin. I know it's too soon. I know you came here for a different life with a different man. But I can't pretend I don't feel what I feel. Eleanor looked up at him, seeing the vulnerability beneath his strength, the tenderness behind his reserve. And what do you feel, Kieran? I'm falling in love with you, he said simply, the words hanging in the air between them like a tangible thing. I think I started falling the moment I saw you. The confession, so direct and unadorned, took Eleanor's breath away. It was so like him, straightforward, honest, without pretense. I never expected this, she whispered. When I left Boston, I thought I knew what my future held. A practical marriage to a man I might grow to care for over time, I never imagined. What? Kieran prompted gently when she trailed off. I never imagined feeling this way, Eleanor admitted, her voice gaining strength with her conviction. So quickly, so completely, it terrifies me, Kieran. His hand tightened on hers. What are you saying, Eleanor? She took a deep breath. I'm saying that I'm falling in love with you too, against all reason, against all propriety. I've tried to deny it, to focus on my teaching, to remember why I came here, but my heart won't listen to reason. The smile that transformed Kieran's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, sudden and brilliant and full of promise. Slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, he raised his free hand to her face, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek with exquisite gentleness. May I kiss you, Eleanor? He asked, his voice husky with emotion. In answer, she rose on tiptoe, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that began tentatively, a tender exploration, then deepened as Kieran's arm encircled her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both breathless, Eleanor rested her forehead against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. What happens now? She murmured. Kieran's hand stroked her hair gently. Now we take our time, get to know each other properly, do things in the right order. Eleanor looked up at him, touched by his consideration. You're a good man, Kieran Lawson. I want to be, he said seriously. For you. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made them step apart, though Kieran kept hold of her hand. Peterson appeared at the schoolhouse door moments later, his expression grave. Thought I might find you two here, he said, his tone indicating more important matters than finding them together. Just came from town, the fever's spreading. Doctors set up a quarantine at the church. How bad? Kieran asked, immediately alert. 6 cases confirmed, 2 of them children, Peterson replied. No fatalities yet, thank God, but the doctor's concerned. Eleanor's thoughts flew to her students. Are any of our children affected? Peterson shook his head. Not yet, but the Jensen farm is close to town. I've warned them to keep to themselves for now. What can we do? Eleanor asked, already thinking of ways to help. Doctor needs volunteers to help with nursing, Peterson explained. They're short-handed with the quarantine in effect. Eleanor straightened, her decision immediate. I'll go. Eleanor, no, Kieran protested, turning to her with alarm. It's too dangerous. I've had scarlet fever as a child, she told him. I'm unlikely to contract it again. I can help, Kieran. Peterson nodded approvingly. That's valuable information, Miss Nichols. The doctor will be grateful for your assistance. Kieran's face was a study in conflicting emotions, pride in her courage warring with fear for her safety. I'm coming with you, he declared. Have you had the fever? Eleanor asked. He hesitated, then shook his head reluctantly. Then you can't, she said firmly. You'd be at risk, and you'd take up a bed that someone else might need. She's right, Kieran, Peterson interjected. We need you here anyway. With so many families keeping to their homes, we're short-handed for the normal ranch operations. Kieran looked as if he might argue further but finally nodded, his jaw tight with reluctance. "When do you leave?" he asked Eleanor. "I can take her into town now," Peterson offered. "Doctor said they need help immediately." Eleanor squeezed Kieran's hand reassuringly. "I'll be careful," she promised, "and I'll send word when I can." The ride to Silver Creek was tense and quiet. Eleanor used the time to mentally prepare herself for what lay ahead, drawing on her experiences helping her mother nurse neighbors during a similar outbreak in Boston years ago. The church had been transformed into a makeshift hospital, with rows of cots filling the main room. Dr. Hamilton, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a worried brow, greeted them with evident relief when Peterson explained Eleanor's nursing experience and immunity. "God bless you, Miss Nichols," the doctor said fervently. "We're desperately short-handed." Eleanor was quickly put to work changing cool compresses for fever, helping patients drink, and assisting the doctor with his rounds. The hours blurred together as she moved from bedside to bedside, offering comfort and care to the suffering. By nightfall, 3 more cases had been brought in, including one of her students, 10-year-old Sarah Jensen, her small face flushed with fever, her throat so swollen she could barely swallow. "Miss Nichols," the child whispered hoarsely when she recognized her teacher. "I'm here, Sarah," Eleanor assured her, bathing the girl's hot face with cool water. "You're going to be fine, I'll stay right beside you." And she did, through the long night as Sarah's fever rose dangerously high, through the terrifying moments when the child struggled to breathe, through the gray dawn when the fever finally broke and Sarah slipped into a healing sleep. Days passed in a similar rhythm of work and worry. Eleanor snatched sleep when she could on a cot in the church vestry, ate whatever food was brought by townspeople, and continued her rounds with tireless determination. A week into the crisis, as she sat beside sleeping Sarah, now recovering steadily, Eleanor heard a familiar voice at the church door. "I'm looking for Eleanor Nichols," Kieran was saying to one of the volunteer helpers. Eleanor rose, her heart lifting at the sight of him despite her exhaustion. She crossed to the door, conscious of her rumpled appearance and the dark circles that must surely show beneath her eyes. "Kieran," she said simply, "you shouldn't be here, it's not safe." His eyes swept over her, taking in her tired face and disheveled hair with an expression of such tenderness it made her throat tighten. "Had to see for myself that you were all right," he said quietly. "Peterson's been bringing reports, but I'm fine," she assured him. "Tired, but fine." "The worst seems to be past. No new cases in 2 days." Relief washed over his features. "When can you come home?" The word home touched Eleanor deeply. The double P had indeed become home to her in a way Boston never had. "Another few days, I think. Some patients still need care." Kieran nodded, though she could see his disappointment. "I brought you something," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket and producing a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Not much, but—" Eleanor unwrapped it carefully to find a small wooden carving of a horse, exquisitely detailed and polished to a soft sheen. "Did you make this?" she asked, running her fingers over the smooth surface. He nodded, a hint of color rising in his cheeks. "Had some time in the evenings. Thought you might like it. It's beautiful," she said sincerely, deeply moved by the gift and the thought behind it. "Thank you." They stood in silence for a moment, the busy activity of the makeshift hospital continuing around them. There was so much Eleanor wanted to say, but this was neither the time nor place. "I should get back," Kieran said finally. "Peterson needs help with the North Pasture herd, but I wanted you to know." He paused, his eyes holding hers. "I meant what I said, Eleanor, every word." "So did I," she replied softly. "I'll be home soon." The tender moment was interrupted by Dr. Hamilton calling for Eleanor's assistance with a patient. With a last longing glance at Kieran, she tucked the wooden horse into her pocket and returned to her duties, her heart lighter than it had been in days. 3 days later, the quarantine was lifted. The fever had run its course, claiming 2 elderly victims but sparing the rest, including all of the children. Eleanor helped the last patients return to their homes, cleaned the church alongside other volunteers, and finally accepted Dr. Hamilton's grateful dismissal. "You've been a godsend, Miss Nichols," the doctor told her, his exhausted face sincere. "I don't know how we would have managed without you. I'm just glad I could help," Eleanor replied honestly. "Will you be all right now?" "Yes, though I'll sleep for a week, I expect," he said with a tired smile. "Your young man has been waiting outside for almost an hour. Best not keep him waiting any longer." Eleanor blushed at the doctor's knowing look but didn't correct his assumption. Outside, as promised, Kieran sat on the church steps, rising quickly when he saw her emerge. "Ready to go home?" he asked simply. "More than ready," she admitted, suddenly feeling the full weight of her exhaustion. He helped her into the wagon, tucking a blanket around her despite the mild day. "You're swaying on your feet," he observed with concern. "When did you last sleep?" "I'm not sure," Eleanor confessed. "The days have blurred together." "Sleep now," Kieran suggested gently. "I'll wake you when we reach the double P." The motion of the wagon and Kieran's solid presence beside her were deeply comforting. Eleanor found herself drifting off, her head gradually coming to rest against his shoulder as sleep claimed her at last. She woke to find the wagon stopped outside the main house of the double P, the familiar building's never a more welcome sight. Kieran was watching her with a tender expression that made her heart skip. "We're home," he said softly. Mrs. Cooper bustled out to greet them, her relief evident. "Thank the Lord you're back safe," she exclaimed, embracing Eleanor. "We've been so worried. Come inside now, hot bath and a proper meal, that's what you need." The next few days passed in a blur of rest and recovery. Eleanor slept for nearly 12 hours that first night, waking refreshed but still weary in her bones. Mrs. Cooper fussed over her, bringing nourishing meals and insisting she rest completely before even thinking about resuming her teaching duties. Kieran visited daily, sometimes just sitting quietly with her on the porch, sometimes telling her about ranch happenings to distract her from the lingering images of the sickroom. His presence was a balm to her spirit, his quiet strength a support she hadn't known she needed. On the third day after her return, as they sat together watching the sunset, Kieran took her hand in his. "Peterson wants to talk to you tomorrow," he said, "about the school and other matters." "Is something wrong?" Eleanor asked, suddenly concerned. "No," Kieran assured her quickly. "Just the opposite, but it's his place to tell you, not mine." The next morning, Eleanor found Peterson in his study, looking unusually formal behind his desk. He rose when she entered, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Miss Nichols," he began, "I want to express my admiration for your courage during the fever outbreak. The entire community is grateful for your service." "Anyone would have done the same," Eleanor demurred. Peterson shook his head. "Not anyone. It takes a special kind of person to put others before themselves the way you did." He cleared his throat. "Which brings me to the matter I wanted to discuss. The town council met yesterday. They've decided to build a proper schoolhouse in Silver Creek." Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise. "That's wonderful news for the children." "Indeed," Peterson agreed. "And they've unanimously voted to offer you the position of schoolteacher, with a proper salary and a small house of your own in town." The offer took Eleanor by surprise. A permanent position, independence, a home of her own, these were substantial benefits that would secure her future in the territory. "I'm honored," she said sincerely. "But what about the ranch children? They can't easily travel to town each day." "We've thought of that," Peterson assured her. "The council proposes that you teach in town 3 days a week and at the ranch 2 days. It's not perfect, but it would serve both communities." "I see," Eleanor said, turning the proposal over in her mind. "When would this arrangement begin?" "Construction on the town schoolhouse will start next week. They hope to have it ready by early spring." Peterson leaned forward. "This is a good opportunity, Miss Nichols. Security, independence, a chance to truly build something lasting here." "May I have some time to consider?" Eleanor asked. Peterson nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. "Of course, though I suspect your decision may depend on another conversation." He rose, signaling the end of their meeting. "Kieran's waiting for you by the corral, said something about showing you the new foals." Eleanor found Kieran leaning against the corral fence, watching a mare and her wobbly-legged foal with an expression of quiet pride. He straightened when he saw her approach, his face lighting up in a way that made her heart race. "Peterson told you about the town's offer?" He asked without preamble. Yes, she confirmed. It's very generous. It's well-deserved, Kieran corrected. The whole territory knows what you did during the fever outbreak. Eleanor moved to stand beside him at the fence, watching the foal nuzzle its mother. It's a significant opportunity, she said carefully. Security, independence. Your own home in town, Kieran added, his voice neutral. Eleanor glanced at him sidelong. Is that what you think I want, to live in town away from the ranch? Kieran turned to face her fully. I think I want you to have choices, Eleanor. Real ones, not just accepting what fate hands you. I've had more choices since coming west than I ever had in Boston, she pointed out, including the choice to follow my heart rather than practical considerations. A cautious hope flickered in Kieran's eyes. And what is your heart telling you? Eleanor took a deep breath. That security isn't just about a job or a house. That independence doesn't have to mean being alone. That home isn't a place, it's where you belong. Kieran moved closer, taking her hands in his. And where do you belong, Eleanor? I think you know the answer to that, she said softly. He shook his head slightly. I need to hear you say it. Eleanor looked up at him, at this man who had become so essential to her happiness in such a short time. With you, she said simply, wherever that may be. The joy that transformed Kieran's face was like nothing Eleanor had ever seen. He drew her closer, one hand cradling her face with infinite tenderness. I love you, Eleanor, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I know it's fast, I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you too, she whispered, the words feeling both momentous and utterly natural. I didn't come west looking for love, but somehow it found me anyway. Kieran's smile was radiant. Then there's something I need to ask you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather pouch. I've been carrying this for days, waiting for the right moment. From the pouch, he withdrew a ring, a simple gold band set with a small, perfect sapphire. It was my mother's, he explained softly. My father gave it to her when they homesteaded in Missouri. She gave it to me before she died, said to save it for a woman as strong and loving as she was. Eleanor's breath caught as Kieran took her hand gently in his. Eleanor Nichols, he said, his eyes never leaving hers, you came west to marry a man you'd never met. Fate had other plans. I'm asking you now, with your eyes open and your heart free to choose, will you marry me, build a life with me here? It won't always be easy, but I promise to love you every day of my life. Tears blurred Eleanor's vision as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Yes, she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, Kieran, I will marry you. With hands that trembled slightly, Kieran slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had been made for her, the sapphire catching the sunlight in flashes of deep blue. Perfect, he murmured, then pulled her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they finally parted, Eleanor rested her head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. I'll accept the town's teaching offer, she decided. But I won't be needing that house in town. Kieran's arms tightened around her. No, she looked up at him, smiling. No, my home is here with you. 2 months later, on a crisp autumn day with leaves turning gold on the cottonwoods along the creek, Eleanor Nichols became Eleanor Lawson in a simple ceremony at the Double P. The ranch hands had decorated the yard with wildflowers and ribbons, and Mrs. Cooper had outdone herself with a feast that would be talked about for years to come. Eleanor wore a new dress of ivory silk that Peterson had insisted on ordering from Denver as his gift, with her mother's lace veil that had arrived just in time from Boston, along with her parents' blessing for the unexpected but joyful turn her life had taken. Kieran, standing tall and handsome in a new suit, had looked at her with such love as she walked toward him on Peterson's arm that Eleanor felt her heart might burst with happiness. Their vows were simple but profound, promises of love and fidelity spoken before God and the community that had become their family. The Double P hands had built them a small cabin not far from the main house, close enough for convenience, but far enough for privacy. Peterson had given Kieran a share in the ranch as a wedding gift, ensuring their future security. Never thought I'd see the day, Peterson had said during his toast at the wedding feast. When this quiet cowboy who showed up at my door 5 years ago would find himself a wife, and not just any wife, but the finest woman to grace Wyoming Territory. To Kieran and Eleanor, may your life together be as beautiful as the love that brought you to this day. Now, as twilight settled over the land, Kieran carried Eleanor across the threshold of their new home, setting her gently on her feet in the main room. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the simple but comfortable furnishings they had collected together. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lawson," Kieran said softly, his eyes reflecting the firelight and something deeper, more enduring. Eleanor reached up to touch his face, marveling at the journey that had brought her to this moment. "When my parents packed my trunk for a man I'd never met, I never imagined I'd find this kind of happiness," she whispered. "Thank you for riding into town that day, for bringing me here, for seeing something in me worth loving." Kieran caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I think I've been waiting for you my whole life," he said simply. "Just didn't know it until I saw you step down from that stagecoach." As night fell over the Wyoming plains, Eleanor Nichols Lawson found herself exactly where she was meant to be, in the arms of a man she loved with all her heart, in a home they would fill with love and laughter, in a life that had begun with a leap of faith and blossomed into something more beautiful than she had ever dared to dream.